Hi, today I'm going to show you how to make this Halloween card using very simple materials, distress inks, punch, and some embossing. The card features these three little guys here, which I use a punch to punch out, and some embossing greetings. Okay, the materials I'll be using today are a series of different colors, which I feel are very Halloween-y, of distress inks. I'm using black soot, antique linen, dusty concord, pumice stone, which is a very light gray, spiced marmalade, mowed lawn. For the memento inks, I'm going to be using rich cocoa, tuxedo black, and I'm going to be using VersaFine onyx black and Stampin' Up white pigment ink. Those are the inks. I'm also going to be using distress inks in marker form. I have aged mahogany, walnut stain, milled lavender, and I also would have liked to have peacock feathers, but I didn't have that available in marker, so I'm substituting the Spectrum Noir marker, which is BT4. I will also be using this punch to punch out the little figures. If you don't have this punch available, you could always fussy cut using a pair of sharp scissors. It's not really difficult. I'm also going to be using white embossing powder, and because I'll be embossing, I need to use the embossing buddy to ensure that the paper doesn't have oils and moisture, so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where I want. Alright, the paper materials we'll be using is, one moment, let me get a little neater here. I have a card base of gray, which I've already scored at 4 1/4. The dimensions for this is 8.5 by 11. And I have a black mat, which is 4 inches by 5 1/4. A purple mat, which is 3 3/4 by 5. A white panel, which is 3.5 by 4 3/4. I also have a piece of white scrap, which you need at least 2.5 to 3 inches by 4 for punching out the mummy and the Dracula. And I also have a scrap of black for the mummy, and this also 3 by 4. Okay, move all this stuff to the side, and I will show you the stamps I'll be using today. I'm going to be using Stampin' Up Wicked Cool. I'm going to use these bats on the inside. Gorgeous Grunge. I'll be using this one, and this one. Spooky Fun. I'll be using this spider web and this spider, and these sentiments here. Happy Halloween, have some spooky fun. And this is the stamp set for the little guys that I'll be putting on. Here's Dracula, the mummy, and the skeleton. This is Cookie Cutter Halloween. This is a gorgeous little cute stamp set. I saw it in the store and I just couldn't resist it. Okay, I'm clear up and get started now. Alright, I cleared out the stuff that I don't need. The first step will be to put the skeleton on the black, the Dracula and the mummy on the white. Since this is going to be embossed, I need to use the embossing tool to make sure there is no extra moisture on the paper. I'll do this at the same time. Alright. The skeleton will be embossed in white. And I'm going to use a white pigment ink, set that aside for a moment, to stamp him. This is a very juicy ink, so you just need to make sure that you get a good coverage without too much extra in the little fingers and things. Straight down, straight up. Alright, while it's still wet, I'm bringing in my embossing powder and drop it right on the pigment ink. And make sure I get the little extra bits. And that looks good. I'll set that aside and move this. And now I'll have to clean the stamp later. Do not forget to clean your stamp, especially when working with pigment inks. Now I will use the black for the Dracula and the brown for the mummy. Make sure you get good coverage, and then straight down and straight up. And I'm stamping the Dracula a little bit to the left and the mummy, a little bit to the right, and the mummy a little bit to the left, because I have to allow for the punch. Okay, and this will be embossed with clear. I showed the little trick about embossing clear over color in another video. Alright, that looks good. Now time for the mummy. Just give a little pat to get the extra off, and they look good. So now I'm going to take them over to the other side of the room and emboss them with the heat tool. Be right back. Okay, now I have finished the embossing, and the skeleton, I don't know if you can see on camera, but he has a little texture now, but he doesn't need any extra work. So we're now going to work on the mummy and the Dracula. Do some coloring. The mummy just needs a little bit of brown tinge to his bandages, so it's quick. So I'm taking the antique linen distress ink and just pressing a little bit onto my block and my aqua pen, which is filled with water. Squirt a little bit on there and pick up a little bit of color. And just give him a little color. That's all he needs. Starting on I'm going to put the shadow coming on the right, so I'm going to make it a little bit darker on the left. And just fade across and make his bandages look all old and yucky, as a mummy should. There, that's all he needs. To clear this, you just press it and wipe it until there is no more ink on the bristles. Very simple. And I'm also going to clean that up. For the Dracula, his skin tone, I want it to be a little bit of green tinge to it, so I'm taking the mode lawn and give it a little press. And I'm going to add a little bit more water with this because I want him to be rather pale. A little bit more water because that looks a little green. There we go. I think that's good. Yeah, that's good. And again, I'm focusing the color coming more from the left. And his little hands. There. Clean my brush. And clean my block. Now I'm going to paint his little vest. Just putting a little bit of ink on here and keeping a relatively dry aqua pen. Pick up the color because I don't want it to bleed into the other areas. Okay, that's good. Wipe that clean. Now the aged mahogany. For his vest. And again, I want to make sure I'm working kind of dry so it doesn't spread where I don't want it. Okay. For his little cross, I'm going to use the marker directly onto the cross so I can control where the color is going. And as you see, it's going to be significantly darker than the watery version was. And it's ribbon around his neck too. And I just realized I didn't get his other sleeve. This is just plain cardstock. I did not use watercolor paper for this. Okay, now clean that ink off the block. And his little sleeves peeking out, I'm just going to lightly color them directly. Okay, so that's all the coloring this needs. So now I'm going to punch it out. If you didn't have the punch, as I said, you would just fussy cut it with the scissors, and that just means take it, a very sharp pair of scissors, and just cut along the outline of the bodies. So this just slides right into the punch. Line it up to make sure that he is where he needs to be in the center. And once you get him where you want him, you slightly depress the punch, not all the way, just slightly, and punch him out. And little bits will fly everywhere. Okay, now his little friends. Let's get little friend Dracula first. Now, if you see how it doesn't quite go into the punch, so I need to get a pair of scissors and trim out the bottom. One moment. Okay. That ought to be enough. Let's see. Yep. Okay, and the same with the skeleton, just center him in there. And once you're happy where he is, slightly depress it and then punch him out. Make sure that you didn't accidentally pick up the hand for the mummy. That would not be good. Now switch him over and do the same thing for the mummy. Okay. pieces fly everywhere. Alright, set that aside. And there are my three gentlemen ready for their card. Do a little cleanup here. Okay. Now I'm going to work on the card panel itself. So bring that back in and move these little guys to the side so they don't get damaged. Okay. Alright, now it's time to work on the panel. Let me show you the card again. The panel has these colors pressed on it with the little embossing of the web in the corner with the little spider and the sentiments. What I'm going to do is work from the lightest color to the darkest, pretty much. So I'm going to start off with antique linen and this stamp, which adds little splatters. You could do this with watercoloring if you wanted, but I have this stamp set and it's just perfect for this. Straight up and straight down. And I'll have to clean it between colors because I don't want to contaminate the next image. So next will be the spice marmalade. And be sure to turn it a little bit to get randomized placement. You don't want it to be samey. And I pressed it full power on the one and then I pressed it again on the other to add a little bit more color. Now the mowed lawn. So there's no wrong way or right way, just go what feels good to you. I'm going to give that another little, yeah, I like that. I'm stamping it off on my grid mat so that I don't transfer too much of the ink to my cleaning pad. It keeps it cleaner longer. Now, bring in some purple. And because my mat is purple, I want this to be pretty dominant. So I'm going to put it a little bit extra. I like that. Okay. And I'm going to switch this to the other stamp for my lines, which I'll use on the pumice stone, and they will go this way. Just put them on there, kind of random looking. There's no right way or wrong way to this. There. Now I'm going to bring in this stamp, which is more splotches, and add a little bit more purple and scatter it around. I think I want to bring in a little bit more orange because the orange seems to be disappearing to me, so I'm going to stick a little bit of that there. A little bit there, trying to fill in some of this white space. Okay, much better. Okay, I like how that looks now. So now I'm going to distress the outer edges with the black soot. And I'm using the Ranger Distress tool, which has these removable pads, which I usually store on the bottom of my ink pad. But you want to be really lightly So I'm going to just distress the edges like this and bring a little bit onto the front of the work. And on the corners, I want to give it a little bit more attention. So I'm going to go a little bit more flat on the corners. And then back to a sideways on the sides. Get a little bit more ink. And this is a very light touch. You don't want to go too heavy, or you will mess up all the work that you've done so far. Get rid of that big white area. I don't care for that. And this is a little too straight, so there. Yeah, I like how that looks now. Okay, we need to let this dry for a few minutes, or you could run your dryer tool over it, heat tool over it to dry it, because we're going to do some embossing next, and we don't want the embossing powder to stick to the distress ink. So I'm going to let it dry. Okay, I use my heat tool to speed up the drying process. So now it's time to do the embossing. Bringing in the original card, I made a mistake on my prototype. I stamped the Happy Halloween before I put the spider web and the spider in, so I couldn't connect it. So I'm going to fix that now by printing the spider and his web first. Making sure you got good coverage, and just angle it in the corner. Okay, now I'm going to connect Mr. Spider. All right, I'm going to be embossing this with clear embossing powder. So let's just get that over, because the ink is still wet enough to do this. I should have gone over it with the embossing buddy before I did that, so let me do that for the rest real quickly. Okay, now my sentiment. As long as you're careful, you can keep it all the dry embossing powder on here and just heat it up at once. Just make sure you don't knock it off when you handle it. Okay, off camera I was putting the embossing powder on. Alright, now I'm going to heat set it with my tool. Okay, now all the embossing is done. You have to let embossing dry for a few moments afterwards to make sure you don't smear it. It happens very quickly. So now I'm going to set this aside for a second and make a quick inside panel. I want to leave it pretty open to allow room for messages, so I just have this little sentiment and the bats and a little piece of extra cardstock, and this should be 5 and a quarter by 4. I could have just stamped directly onto the gray card base, but I don't care for how that looks very much, so I just decided to add a little bit of white. Okay, and that's good. Set that aside to dry. Now I'm going to start assembling the card. All right, bring all the parts back in. First the card base, and you need a bone folder to get a good crease. The side that you the side that you use the bone folder on when you're scoring it will be outside the card. The side with the raised area is the inside of the card. So fold it in, line up the edges, and make a good seal with the bone folder. Burnish this edge. This is a landscape card, so making sure that it's landscape, I will use my ATT gun, which is just a tape gun. If you don't have this, you can use your whatever you have, your tape or glue if you prefer that, or glue stick. I wouldn't recommend a glue stick for this many layers because the adhesive wears away over time and your card will come apart. So just center it in place, making sure you get it as straight as you can. And now the purple layer. You could skip this layer if you wanted, you don't really need it. But I thought it added a nice pop of color. And now the panel. Now for the inside of the card, I realized that I stamped it portrait, but I needed to stamp it landscape. So I can fix that by trimming off a little bit at the end. I'll do that later. Okay, now I need to put some foam tape on these little guys to pop them up. Alright, I put foam tape on the little guys off camera because it takes a little bit of time for me, but just want to make sure that you have it all covered so that it'll be raised up enough. Just pull off the little tape. Oh, you know what? I'll put the Dracula on the far end. I like him better over there. These little tape bits are a little tricky if you got fingernails, so bear with me. There. Okay, and here's the skeleton. I'll put him a little close. It looks like he's holding hands. It's all one big happy monster family. And the mummy is next. And there we are. That's the card today. I hope you enjoyed these techniques. We covered embossing. This was clear embossing over black, how to use a punch, little coloring techniques with a little shadowing technique, embossing with white. And here's the inside of the card. Okay, thank you for watching, and I hope you feel comfortable enough to try this card on yourself. Bye-bye.